All right. Well, welcome to another one of our University of Minnesota Certificate of Elections Administration webinars, where we talk about the big hard-hitting items of elections administration. And we're really lucky today to have Alysoun McLaughlin from the University of Maryland, who's going to talk to us about some of the really important work that the University of Maryland's been doing recently on resilience in the elections workforce. Why don't we go ahead and get started? I'm sure you're aware, but if you need the closed caption, that option's available to you on the bottom of the screen, and then you also can provide questions, and we'll try to get to those toward the end of today's webinar. I do sort of curate those questions, so if you're sending them to me as we go, it's really helpful. I can get them into the queue and we can make sure that they get asked. If you send me a question in the last 5 minutes, chances are really good I'm not going to get to it. So as you have a question, please do put it in the Q&A. All right, well, let me tell you a little bit about the Certificate of Elections Administration program. It is a pretty amazing program where we teach a number of different classes on elections administration, all sort of soup to nuts about how to become an elections administrator and how to be good at that job once you're in it. It's taught by some of the nation's most prominent elections officials and elections sophisticates, people that really understand elections administration. It's an online course, so you can take it anywhere in the world. It's available to you 24 hours a day. It's set up in a format that mirrors a semester. So the longer classes go, say, January to May, and the shorter classes are half of a semester. They either qualify for 1, 2, or 3 hours of credit. And to complete the program, you need to acquire the 12 credit hours. We have a fantastic, like pretty much unbeatable placement record of if you graduate through this program, you're pretty much going to be an elections official if you want to be. And in fact, several people work in the state of Colorado who have gone through the program. I know a number are in Minnesota, and then frankly, throughout the country now as we've placed more and more folks. So if you're interested in elections administration or you want to become more sophisticated in the various elements of elections administration, it's a really great program to get involved in. You can see there on the screen the email address. It's ceaprogram@umn.edu. I always, when I'm sort of searching for it, I go to Google or whatever the search engine is, and I put in CEAHHH, HHH standing for the Hubert H. Humphrey Institute or School at the University of Minnesota. If you put that in, it's going to be your first thing that comes up in your search. So how do you join the program? Well, if you want to apply for the full program, so go get started on the 12 hours, you can apply through December 19th, so about 2 more weeks. But you can also just try out a class. You could just take a class in this upcoming semester and see if it's a program that's really going to work for you. And to find out more information there, again, you can email the program directly or go to the webpage. The application process itself is really straightforward, very easy. We don't ask for a lot. We're just interested in who you are and a little sample of the reasons why you're interested in elections administration. And you might be interested. Here are the classes that we have scheduled for this spring. I'm teaching a class on elections and the law. That is a very timely class right now as the elections world is facing many legal questions and challenges. So, in fact, I've been thinking to myself, what am I going to do with that class? I've got so much I could talk about. I'm actually sort of rethinking, well, I need to add some of this new stuff. So it should be a great class. There's also Tim Collins' class on strategic management and elections administration. And then Tammy Patrick, the world famous Tammy Patrick, is going to teach a class on data analysis and elections administration. That is a super fun course. I've sat in on pieces of that and learned a lot about it. She really talks about how do you acquire data? How do you use data? How do you think through data in the pursuit of a good elections administration? Also, coming halfway through the semester in March, we're teaching an election security class, and it says to be determined. They're to be announced on the screen. But I happen to know through sources that I can't disclose that Ryan Macias is going to teach that class. You may know Ryan from his time working for the Elections Assistance Commission or his time leading voting system certification in California, or the fact that he is the freelance go-to guy that jumps on a plane and comes to see your office in case you ever do have a technology question in your state or local government. So really, really an amazing gift for us that Ryan Macias is going to teach that class in March. So here is Alysoun's information and the title of the talk, but I'm going to stop us right now. So how do I get out of this? I will stop the share, and I want to show you some super cool, so I got to get out of that. I wanted to show you a little bit about the Elections Trust Initiative, which is the funder for some of the great work that Alysoun's doing and other great programs that are happening through the Elections Trust Initiative. So ETI, it's funny, in the history of elections administration over the last 20 years or so, there have been these big shots of funding that have come. The Pew Center on the States did a big program back in starting about 2006, 7, 8, where they funded a couple of major initiatives. The Democracy Fund was a big player and still is in a number of respects. We also received a lot of outside funding, so sort of one-time funding related to the COVID year and some, quite extensive funding from nonprofit sources. But the ETI is sort of the new player on the block over the last couple of years. They are affiliated with the Pew Center, so the Pew is back in elections funding. And I just wanted to give you sort of broad brushstrokes of some of the things that the ETI is funding and the amazing contribution that they're making to the work of elections administration. So I'm going to show you, let's see. This is a list of some of the current grants that ETI is funding. And you'll see these little red markers here. They sort of set aside the different areas that they're funding. These first couple of grants are engaging diverse stakeholders to bolster adequate, reliable public funding for elections operations. So how do we get consistent funding for elections administration? Well, the ETI has funded, 5 different institutes or universities in the research of those questions. They're also funding engagement of diverse stakeholders to mobilize support for evidence-based policy on impartial elections administration. You can see that there are a number of things there. This is the big one here, which I wanted to draw your attention to. Build a field of scholarship to generate actionable, trusted, empirical evidence for election policy and practice in the community. This you can see there's a number of universities that have been funded through ETI grants, and these are not small grants. These are big chunks of money to help either support an existing program or help to establish and create a program for the betterment of elections administration. And the idea behind this one is there are all these academics out there doing these research projects, but they're not really talking to elections administrators. So there may be something known to the academic world that's really not known to elections administration. There's also a lot that elections administrators know that academics don't know, that academics have no understanding of. And so what this idea of that ETI is funding is the bringing together of those conversations so that both the academic side and the elections administration side can benefit from the work that's being done to research elections administration. So the biggest example here is the Metzel program at MIT, which Metzel has been around for quite some time. That's Charles Stewart's program, for those of you that are engaged in these questions. Charles does amazing work. That Metzel is sensational, and they've always been a leader on this, and ETI is really supporting them. But on the screen, you see Alysoun. And Alysoun is the director of the work that's being done at the University of Maryland. And you can see the description there, launching the Election Resilience Lab. Well, that's what we're going to hear about today, is the Elections Resilience Lab. There's also another big hub of this conversation between academics and administrators is the University of California, San Diego. That's Thad Kauser's program. He does amazing work that you may remember has done one or maybe even two of these presentations. So they do amazing work down there, which is a lot of survey and sort of quantitative work related to surveying the world of elections administration. Anyway, those are some various different ideas that have been funded by ETI, and I just would draw your attention to the fact that on the screen, you can see the University of Minnesota has also received funding from ETI. And the whole idea of that funding is so that we can better understand how we can scale up this program. So right now we produce, tens of elections administrators each year that can go out into the world and become an elections administrator. The idea is through the help of ETI that we may be able to scale that up to produce dozens, maybe even hundreds of elections administrators to fill the openings that are in elections administration right now. So I just wanted to celebrate ETI and their amazing contribution and sort of tee that up for Alysoun. I know that she's going to talk about a more specific thing that the University of Maryland's doing, but I just wanted to tell you where some of the base funding is coming for this program and others. All right, so with that, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to hand the controls off to Alysoun so she can do her presentation. Thank you so much for being here.
Okay, and let me get my screen shared. And get it into a presentation mode here.
See, folks, this is a skilled professional. She knows exactly what she's doing.
Right. I got some new controls showing up here that are messing with me as I try to share my screen. So give me a second while I move this bar out of the way. If I can.
I think if you start the slideshow, so if you do the start slideshow at the bottom or slideshow at the top, it should come up.
There we go. It was the top I couldn't find, but you directed me to the button at the bottom. See, definitely a skilled professional. uh, so yes, thank you, Judd. I appreciate this. I appreciate the opportunity to be part of your webinar series. I have watched several of your webinar series, and this is a really great opportunity for me to showcase some of the work that we're doing at the Election Resilience Lab, some of what we've learned so far, and to share some insights that hopefully some of the current as well as future election officials that are on this webinar can bring back to your own work, and to those that you work with, those who fund your work, those who you work with to make decisions about your staffing, whether that's a budget office or a human resource office or a county board or whoever the governing authority is in your jurisdiction that you work with on things like your personnel budget. And I want to start off with just setting the stage about the Election Resilience Lab, about why we chose the name that we chose, and what we mean by resilience and how we tie this to the workforce issues. So as Judd indicated, the Election Resilience Lab is a new effort funded by the Election Trust Initiative, um, and it is housed within an existing center at the University of Maryland that's called the Center for Democracy and Civic Engagement, which is in the Department of Government and Politics. Um, we uh, we draw research support from the center, from the existing faculty, the existing students, the resources of the university and the pre-existing center here. And one of the things that we also do is bring in faculty fellows through the center. I began as a faculty fellow with the Center for Democracy and Civic Engagement as we began to build the concept and build the proposal to the Election Trust Initiative to fund the work that we're doing. So we use that model of bringing in faculty fellows to help support our work, to help do our research, and we've been able to bring in some former election officials, some workforce experts, and some others with a lot of experience in the field to help inform the work that we're doing. So what do we mean by resilience? It's become a popular buzzword in elections. We talk about it, though, a lot of the time as if resilience means being personally strong, as if it means kind of rolling with the punches. Um, we talk about election officials as superheroes. We have an election hero day. We use this sort of language of personal strength and as if that is what it takes to be resilient. But in fact, that's not what resilience needs to be about. Resilience should not be about living in constant crisis. It should not be about personal heroics and resorting to personal heroics in order to administer elections. It's about building institutions that have the capacity, where you have the workforce capacity, where you have the organizational culture, where you have the infrastructure in order for elections to live up to our expectations of them. Now, there's this concept in the business world of slack, and you can optimize for more or less of it, but the point is to think strategically about it. The point is to think strategically about your capacity to rise to the challenge when you actually face extraordinary circumstances and not to treat everything as a crisis. But often we tend to staff elections as if they are sort of planned crises, and it's sort of an all hands on deck responsive approach. Not everywhere, but in many cases, and there's a strain there that we see where if you really want to strengthen our election system, then we need to understand the issues that are going on in the election workforce and the strain which is at the human level. But the root causes and the solutions are really not on individual people to be strong. They are on the problems and the solutions are really at a system level. Now, this chart sets the stage. I stole this chart. It's not my work. I stole it from the Bipartisan Policy Center, and it shows election official turnover rates from 2004 to 2024. And what you can see is that the turnover is steadily rising. The Bipartisan Policy Center suggests a number of reasons for this, which they draw largely from the survey of local election officials that the Elections and Voting Information Center at Reed College, along with Portland State, has been doing for many years. And what they suggest is that a big part of this is or may be increased hostility that public servants are facing, not just election officials, but of course, election officials are a big part of that. They also note that there's an increased complexity of the role of the election administrator as we have rising expectations from federal legislation, state legislation, and just what the voters expect of our elections that are contributing to a rising workload in many ways. And they also cite some underlying demographic factors of an aging public workforce as well as contributing to this trend. Now, increasing hostility is certainly an issue, and I think we can all agree that that's a problem. And we can certainly have conversations about the aging workforce. But the real area of focus that I want to talk about is the increased complexity of the role and what that means for election administration and for the election workforce. That's the part that's personal to me. To take you back to the chart, I'm on that chart at the tip of it, at the very top. I am personally I'm a former election official, and I'm a statistic. I retired, or I don't like to use the word retired. I actually just go ahead and flat say that I burned out on election administration in 2024. The job was getting more difficult. And it wasn't just the pandemic. You can see that this is a trend line that was going up before the pandemic. It actually dipped a little bit during the pandemic, as I would say that election officials, maybe who were going to retire, largely held on in order to see their jurisdiction, in order to see us through a public health crisis. And then it continued rising. Um, and so the burnout, let's talk about burnout. The World Health Organization calls burnout an occupational phenomenon that results from workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. Now, just focusing in on that sentence right there, it's an occupational phenomenon. Burnout is not a health condition. It results from chronic workplace stress, with the emphasis there on the word chronic. This is not a single difficult time in your life, a single difficult time at the office, a single difficult election. It doesn't result in chronic workplace stress, but ongoing pressures of the work do. Um, that has not been successfully managed. So chronic stress that has not been successfully managed, well, that suggests that there are in fact ways to successfully or maybe at least better manage workplace stress. And we'll get into that a little bit. The World Health Organization's definition then goes on to say that it's characterized by feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion. I think we all know what that looks like. But the second two bullets of this, I think, are really very important for us to talk about and for election officials to think about and apply to what you see in the field, what you see in your work, and what you see in your approach to the work. The second is increased mental distance from one's job or feelings of negativity or cynicism related to one's job. Well, I think we all know people who have put it all out there on the field for so long that you start to see this in some people who have been around and really done some wonderful things in the field, mentors to us all, but you start to see that cynicism arise. And that is a real factor in burnout. That is something that people struggle with in other high pressure sectors, that struggled with in healthcare. You see it in people in public safety. It's a real concern, and it's a real concern for people in our field. And then reduced professional efficacy. That right there, if nothing else, makes the case in budget terms, in performance terms, for why we really do need to treat the human side of this as something that is important. Oh, no, I'm going to stay on this slide for now, because I want to talk about my journey a little bit here and say that, after 14 years as an election official, I saw the creeping signs of burnout in myself, and I saw it in many of my peers, and I saw it in my employees. And I could really see that the harder that I worked and the longer hours that I put in, the less effective that I was. And I was struggling to manage that for myself. I was struggling to manage that for my team. And it wasn't just a matter of seeking more resources. Actually, the office where I was a large county. I was in Montgomery County, Maryland. But our budget more than doubled between 2014 and 2024. We went from a $6 million budget to a $12 million budget. I think it's up to $14 million now. So the challenge was not getting more money for our office. The challenge was actually managing that growth. It was managing that change. It wasn't in my jurisdiction. It wasn't about threats or harassment. Thankfully, I was spared a lot of that in my community, but it was about change management. It was about leading while exhausted. It was about them, and rising to meet those new demands. And I quite frankly didn't have it in me. I put in my notice. I spent some time on succession planning and knowledge transfer, and then I did some consulting. And I took some time to reflect on my experiences and what I could do with the benefit of hindsight to support current election officials and future election officials in avoiding my experience and strengthening the resilience of themselves, of their institutions, and of the staff that they lead. And part of that was a learning process. I started reading. I was reading academic literature in management and public administration and organizational behavior, and trying to understand my experience, and how to apply it. And I had the opportunity to work, and now I'll go ahead and advance to that slide. I had the opportunity to work with an incredible team here at the Center for Democracy and Civic Engagement that brought me in as a fellow to help inform the research that they were doing. And they were working to bring what they called inclusive consensus to the academic research that they were doing. Now, this is basically the themes that Judd was talking about and that the Election Trust Initiative is looking to foster in election administration. The idea is that by bringing people with direct experience and knowledge about the processes that you're studying, that that you can form better questions, that you can identify better data, that you can come up with more suited research methods and yield stronger and more relevant results. Working together with practitioners to decide what to study, what research methods to use, and what results to focus on is particularly useful, I think, in studying a very complex and interdisciplinary topic like the election workforce. Um, and so, as I mentioned earlier, as we delve deeper into public administration and the challenges of human resource management, we also brought on some team members who have expertise in those fields, who also serve as fellows of the Center for Democracy and Civic Engagement and as part of the work of the Election Resilience Lab. This slide shows a story of you can see there that gentleman is looking for his car keys under the streetlight. And as the story goes, this gentleman was having trouble finding his keys. And so somebody asked why he was looking over there, looking over under the streetlight instead of maybe over by his car. And the answer that the gentleman gave was that because this is where I can see. So the idea is that with this process of inclusive consensus and bringing in more stakeholders who look at these issues from different directions, that we can shine more lights on the problems and maybe find the car keys where they are over by the car rather than the only place that this gentleman knew to look, which was under the streetlight. So I was all in. I had I'll stay on this slide for a minute. I really had a lot of research questions that I wanted to pursue, and they weren't necessarily the same questions that academic researchers were studying or that policy researchers in the space were studying, because I was more interested in this management side of election administration. There's a lot of really useful research out there on topics ranging from what works to combat misinformation and disinformation, to auditing election results, to training poll workers so that they remember and retain the information that you've given them. But what does it cost to do all of these things well? And how do you measure and communicate what your office has the capacity to do and where choices need to be made about your priorities and about the standards of service? How many hours of overtime is too many hours before your staff needs to be sent home for the night, whether they think so or not, so that they get some sleep and don't make errors the next day that would compromise voter confidence? So these are the questions that I was interested in pursuing and designing research that's centered on the lived experience of election officials and the pain points of election professionals, in our view, can really empower those who are doing the work with the evidence that they need to be able to advocate for themselves and to do things like reducing burnout among election professionals. And so that's how we formed the idea and began the work of the Election Resilience Lab. As Judd read from the description on the Election Trust Initiative website earlier, as a hub for research to identify and demonstrate what works to strengthen the people and the workplaces of democracy. Our research is led by election officials and workforce development specialists, as I mentioned earlier, under the notion that resilient elections really begins with a resilient workforce, and that working long hours under challenging working conditions to meet ever-rising demands leads to exhaustion and burnout that pose risks to the performance of the election system. And so our approach is to test practical solutions to common staffing challenges, to measure results, to demonstrate what's working, and help target areas for improvement, and to build an evidence base that's drawing on research in other fields, as well as new research that we're doing and working with others who are studying these issues in academia and with election officials, to build an evidence base to support improvements in management practices and policies and resource allocation in election administration. So let me then talk a little bit about what we've done so far. What you see right now on the slide is An overview of some work that we did in the 2024 presidential election with support from the U.S. Election Assistance Commission. We brought in a team of former election officials to conduct a study of election staffing. We did a review of existing research and practice, and we had some prominent people in the academic space support us with that. We also did some interviews and observations with election officials. Overall, we talked to 40 election officials, 40 offices, and we did on-site observations in 30 of them. And these were observations during the peak of the election season. We sent in former election officials who could be trusted to ask the non-intrusive questions and to sort of work with election officials to see their staffing and talk with them while they were very busy conducting the election in the weeks just leading up to and the weeks just after the presidential general election. And we collected and analyzed and spoke with election officials about their organizational charts and their job descriptions, and learned some interesting things that we'll talk about. So now, of course, we know that there's a variation in the institutional authority and organizational structure in elections. In some places, election officials are elected. In others, they are appointed to their office. In some places, there are bipartisan boards that oversee the process. We also know that in some places, like Maryland, elections is all housed within a single department or agency of government. We have a board of elections staff. But in other places, the duties might be split between different offices, where you may have one constitutional officer that's responsible for voter registration, while another is responsible for staffing polling places. And this leads, of course, to an assignment of different kinds of job duties to different staff with different kinds of workers with different kinds of job descriptions and combinations of them. We know, of course, that we have a seasonally fluctuating workload in elections, some places more and some places less. But in general, this is a fact of election administration, and that leads to reliance on a variety of different kinds of surge staffing approaches. Um, the the organizational charts don't necessarily show the entirety of the team, don't necessarily show all of the temporary staff, the seasonal staff, the cross-functional relationships between departments, kind of informal supervision chains that occur, or the dependencies on outside departments and vendors. And we wanted the complete picture. But what we saw, first of all, of course, was a big difference in size. Now, this is the organizational chart in front of you for San Joaquin County, California, which has about 400,000 registered voters, and their office is divided up into a number of different divisions, and there's layers of management within their office. This is the organizational chart for Mercer County, Pennsylvania, which has about 70,000 registered voters, and it's a much more flat organizational chart where you have a lot more work sharing, and obviously fewer layers of management in their office. But possibly the most interesting thing we found or were able to document by going in on the ground and looking in these offices in Mercer County, Pennsylvania, when I was sitting in their office and working with Thad Hall, the election director there, I didn't see the organizational chart on the left in action. What I saw was the organizational chart on the right, because in fact there were a number of different temporary employees, there were precinct officials, there were party officials who in Pennsylvania play a strong role in helping to recruit the individuals who were then going to serve at the polls to fill vacancies. There's a number of different kinds of surge staffing models in play. And this may be small for you to see on your screen, but this is a chart that shows the variety of different kinds of labor sources that election officials use for surge staffing, ranging from hiring temporary staff, using temp agencies or contract labor, or there are some really, I think, very interesting and valuable models in a lot of places, and Mercer County was one of them, where they borrow staff from another department or agency for short-term tasks when their primary job duty can be set aside for a week, 2 weeks as needed. And they're able to kind of beg, borrow, and steal experienced and available labor from elsewhere within their county. And then, of course, you've got vendor support and poll workers and volunteer support of all kinds. So what really stood out for us was how little of the election workforce is actually permanent. Even in the smallest offices where there's only one person responsible for elections on paper, typically we found that there were people that they rely on, whether that is their precinct officials, their poll workers, or whether it is others within their jurisdiction, their county or their city, um, and drawing on temporary labor in a variety of ways. Um, but in some offices, the workforce can double or triple or more during an election season. And in practice, that means a constant cycle of recruiting, of onboarding, of training, and then letting people go, only to start again for the next election. And so, what we found in talking to election officials during the 2024 election was that they've really used a lot of these different kinds of labor sources very creatively and increasingly in recent years to minimize the downsides of that uh, that downtime, that tension, that friction in needing to recruit anew for new election cycles, and to take advantage of different kinds of creative labor sources. One of my favorite examples actually was in Ada County, Idaho. They they worked out an arrangement to borrow some of the staff from their recording division on a seasonal basis, and because they made it a long-term arrangement, they were actually able to give those employees a raise, give them some additional funding to reflect the fact that they have some additional skills that they are called on to employ as needed in the election office, and they get compensated extra for the additional experience and skills that they bring to the work. Um, we also found a number of problematic things that come from this reliance on surge staffing. Temporary labor is in many cases not only being used for what we would consider entry-level jobs. There are entire functions in elections that are only staffed seasonally. So it's really not uncommon to find temporary employees, and they may be retirees who've had a career managing complex operations and have a high public service motivation, who are willing to take a minimum wage job where they're responsible for things like staffing all of the polling places in their county, or running the entire poll worker training program, or managing the entirety of the vote by mail operation for their jurisdiction. In smaller jurisdictions, that may be the person who's responsible for running the entire election. This puts these functions at risk when a functionally overqualified worker is in a position that is really not classified. There hasn't been a salary survey that supports that. Um, they're functionally overqualified for the position that they're working in. And then when they leave, that can make it very difficult to fill that position. And it puts those functions at risk. So, in this case, I just want to underscore that we're really not just talking about people who are serving for a day or for a week of early voting, but in many cases, we're talking about year-round temporary employees. And this has a lot of implications, not just for turnover, but also for performance management and sustainability, for the ethics of outside employment, for how we think really overall about the human resource side of elections when it's not a civil service job. Um, so I wanted to spend some extra time talking about surge staffing because I think that's really a very important feature that brings a lot of challenges to the landscape for election administration. But overall, that was one of the issues that we found when we talked to election officials in the 2024 cycle about the workforce challenges that they were facing. And we categorized their key workforce challenges really into four categories. The first was staffing. And nearly every election official, with some exceptions, but nearly every election official that we talked to in the 2024 cycle described some form of feeling short-staffed. Sometimes that meant that they weren't authorized to hire the people that they wanted to hire. Sometimes it meant that they couldn't fill a position because they felt the pay levels were too low for them to attract qualified candidates. Um, Overall, that tended to lead to consequences in long hours, stress, worries about their own work quality, some of the things that I talked about in my experience and my path toward burnout in election administration. And a lot of the people who cited these problems were saying that they were really working these long hours and that it was affecting their quality of work. We found as part of that what evidence of what I call the overtime spiral, where you begin an election process understaffed and then you're already behind, you're already underwater, and the overtime hours don't let up. Um, and that workload can really compound like interest over time. It's a red flag, and excess overtime early in election season, I would argue, should really be treated as an early warning sign of an increased risk of other kinds of problems later in the election season. Um, the next theme was compensation, which of course is tied to staffing, but generally, election officials were describing to us that they were worried about the inability to compensate their staff for the work performed, or that they were worried about their inability to recruit people to fill those positions if someone left. This was generally tied to a sense that the compensation for the work was based on outdated job descriptions or requirements. And so that's something that we can focus on when we get into talking about recommendations in just a minute. Um, and we could talk about the challenges of getting a pay increase in an election office. I want to make sure that I leave some time for questions here, so I'm not going to get into that in depth. But the next two themes were working conditions and the workload, both of which I talked about a bit earlier on. But for us, working conditions was not just about threats and harassment. It was something that election officials really identified all kinds of environmental factors, whether that was material things like not having enough office space. And it was also things like professional respect and feeling that their decisions were not heard in decisions by their county board or their state legislature about policy. So I'm going to skip past talking about challenges any further and make a couple of sort of high level recommendations and hit on a couple of things that I would say that that you can do, and I would say that you can do based on the fact that we have seen other election officials do these things and find success. And one of the things that we'll be doing over the course of the next year or two is taking some voices of election officials and really amplifying the kinds of successes that they have had in addressing these challenges so that they can be a model for other election officials. I would urge you to take a strategic and a collaborative approach and think in both the short term and the long term about your workforce needs. It's often not possible to solve some of the challenges that are facing us structurally and institutionally within the time window that we have before the next election. But if we work on both the short-term need and on the long-term needs at the same time, we can move that ball forward. And to really just recognize that fundamentally it falls on the election official, it falls on the person who is in charge of running elections in a jurisdiction to really articulate the value, to really articulate what it is that additional resources or support will provide for your office. So based on our work and based on these models that we've seen of other jurisdictions, I would recommend really 4 phases of an action plan for you in addressing your staffing needs. The first is to evaluate your workforce capacity at different stages of the election process. Your staffing needs are different during the couple of weeks after an election than they are the couple of weeks before election and maybe 6 months before. And being able to really clearly articulate that to your budget office, to your H office, to your governing body, so that they understand the different kinds of surge support in particular that you need at different times in the election is important. Visualizing that, mapping that out so that they understand that an election is not just something that you're doing for 2 weeks and maybe 2 weeks after an election. To develop a formal multi-year action plan, a written plan that you can discuss with other stakeholders in your county or your city or your jurisdiction to address the gaps that you've identified. To constantly keep in mind the skill development and training needs that you may have in terms of the different types of support emerging leaders may need, subject matter experts who maybe need leadership development skills in order to be part of your succession plan, or the technical training that somebody in your office who would like to advance in their skills would need. One size really does not fit all in skill development and training. And to focus on building a strong and supportive workplace culture, which the first steps of which are to target employee working conditions. The simple things that you can do to make sure that employees have the tools to do their job are very important. Taking visible steps to control out of control overtime and address unused leave. Make sure that your rewards, your flexible scheduling, your work from home policies are not just flexible, but fair. and to make sure that you are appreciating your staff. Retention is about more than money. Feeling valued, feeling appreciated, feeling supported are things that people cite as why they will stay in a job even when they're facing other kinds of reasons why they might consider leaving, and that help to prevent burnout. I'm going to close just with a discussion of overtime. I've talked about overtime a lot, but I think this is really important, and this is something that, as much as I, for years, tried to reduce overtime, tried to make the case to my budget office that I needed to have temps hired sooner, I needed to lift hiring freezes earlier to prevent overtime, and struggled with that year after year. I actually had never found or learned about this curve. This is called the BRT curve, and it's actually from a 1980 report that the Business Roundtable put out, talking about the effects on productivity of scheduled overtime. And this chart shows that when you have an employee who is working 50 hours a week, right at about, in this case, about 7 weeks into it, you see that you've lost the value. There is no return on those additional overtime hours anymore. You have functionally driven that employee into a point of reduced productivity where they would be better off if they were just working 40 hours. Um, and this is, I've seen this chart in a number of different places, so I can't cite it. I'm still trying to find the source for it. But understanding the point of diminishing productivity, when you overlay that on what the election calendar can look like, draws a really sharp picture, where you might feel like you're doing well, you're getting taking care of everything early, making sure that those ballots are mailed out, quickly to the voters. By the time you hit election day, that can mean that you've got nothing left in the tank. And errors can occur in those kinds of situations, in that period between election day and the certification of your election, where that really can drive down voter confidence. And so I know we are really tight on time, so I'm going to end there, and let Judd go ahead and take it away.
Thank you so much, Allison. That's very informative. And frankly, I like every slide. I was like, "Yep, live that one. Yep, live that one."
Mhm.
So that really hit home for me. So I have a question. I know we've got one in the Q&A that I think is very relevant to what you are talking about. But let me start out. Here has always been my issue with surge hiring.
Mhm.
I always, my thinking has always been, and you please tell me that I'm wrong. I'd love to be wrong, but my thinking has always been, and boy, as I'm saying this in my head, it sounds derogatory. I don't mean it that way. But if those folks that you're hiring in a short-term manner, typically those are people that are either retired, they don't have a ton of qualifications, or in some other way they're either unhirable or they just lack a lot of opportunities. And so when you hire people in that sort of surge context, aren't you sort of creating problems for yourself? You're creating the need to scale these people up to do the work is more difficult than just bringing people in on a permanent basis and then shifting around the chess pieces when there are needs in your office that maximize in one area or another. So that's always the way I thought of surge hiring, but tell me I'm wrong.
No, you're not wrong at all. I think of it in exactly the same way as you do. And I always, throughout my tenure in elections, I had multiple positions for temporary employees that I was trying to make the case in our annual budget process to make permanent, because so many of the needs we were uh, those functionally overqualified temps that are doing, there's a lot of risk when you've got people really that you're relying on to handle key things about your operation, who are temporary employees making minimum wage, no benefits, um, and exactly the kinds of inconsistent quality issues that you're talking about are an issue as well. So it's sort of a little bit of both. We need a certain level of surge staffing in order to do because the workload does accordion the way it does in election administration. And we need to be very cognizant of where we can over rely on surge staffing because it's the available tool in our drawer, where what we really need is more permanent positions in a lot of cases for these year-round functions.
Yeah, 100%. The other thing that comes to mind, and I know this is a large jurisdiction issue, so probably not all that relevant to a number of the elections administrators that are on the screen, but um, I'll just pick on Denver because it's the metro I know the best. Denver is six different counties. So there are six different elections administrations that are happening simultaneously in an election. And it's not just one. So the pool of people that you can hire from, you're all competing for the same folks because those are the people that live within, 10 miles of where you need them to work. And so um, you can find election judges, poll workers, because they are truly temporary. But those people that you need to bring in for 40 hours a week for 6 weeks, you're arm wrestling with the rest of those jurisdictions to get those folks in. And so that's always been
Mhm.
a dilemma, I think, for these jurisdictions as well.
Yeah. Yeah, when we sure struggled with that. And then in the 2022 cycle, of course, coming out of the pandemic with the kinds of workforce availability changes that we saw at that point in time, we were we were struggling. We were at about uh, a third of our positions were vacant. About a third of our temporary positions were vacant throughout that entire cycle because they were difficult to fill.
Right. All right, so we do have a question in the Q&A, and so Henok is asking, hey, we've got an opening for a local election director, and I happen to know that Henok is in Washington County, which is in Minnesota. Um, what do we do about that? We can't find somebody who meets our qualifications, who's in our hiring pool. What would you advise him?
Well, I don't know the circumstances in your jurisdiction or exactly what your labor force issues are, but I can say that from what I've seen, we have definitely seen some positions where the top job for an election director has had to be advertised more than once, where the pay has had to be increased for those positions. There's been some work. I don't know about in your case, but there's been some work demonstrating that the salaries of election officials are generally lower than for other department heads of other offices of county and city government. But also, I found something really interesting in that one challenge is people not wanting the top job, people who are capable but don't want the stress, that don't want that kind of advancement in the field. And another challenge is people from outside the field who I would say do have the skills for elections work, not feeling like they know the field well enough. I've spoken with people who are very knowledgeable about elections who just don't think they know enough about public administration to cross over into the
Yeah.
public administration side. It's a
Well,
ticketing is a
the
challenge.
the director position is a generalist, right? And so
Hmm.
a lot of people are just really not interested in being they love the thing that they do. The idea of running budgets and managing people, doing hiring and firing and stuff like that is just not a skill that they really are interested in.
Now, I should say, and I have a colleague, Lynn Handy is a fellow here also with the Center for Democracy and Civic Engagement, and she's a workforce development expert. And she's been able to work with a couple of jurisdictions and work in other sectors with people to basically just rewrite their job ads so that they're clearer on what it is that you're looking for and so that they actually attract candidates. Um, so that may be something that we can work with you or that you can work in-house to just really look at that job description and see what you're asking for.
Yeah, and we've done a lot of that at our office on attempting to diversify because,
Mhm.
frankly, the hiring pool that our typical county employees, state employees tends to be very white, it tends to lean male, tends to be slightly older, and we're really thinking about, we always really try to think about how are we positioning our openings so that we can maximize the group of people that are applying. And that, of course, translates into the type of application that you're putting out there. All right. Well, actually, one more note. I won't put you on the spot, although you can comment if you'd like. One thing that stood out to me in President Trump's executive order from March 25th is Section 6A. For all of my past students in election law, you will remember we talked about this. Section 6A talks about how people that work in elections must be U.S. citizens. Now, this hasn't been challenged, but for states that are border states or states that have a diverse local population, you may have very appropriate people to bring on for surge hires and so forth who are non-U.S. citizens who could do a great job for you. But under that executive order, if it's legal, you would be limited in that. Have you guys done any work on that? Or is that a question that's come up at all?
In my case, speaking from my own experience in my jurisdiction here in Maryland, our jobs have to be held by people who are registered voters in the state of Maryland. So, of course, that requires that you be a U.S. citizen. Um, the real issues that we've run into have been, as you sort of mentioned a little bit earlier, with respect to residency, where we aren't really able to hire people who live in D.C. or who live in Virginia, who are just
Yeah.
miles maybe from the office. But the sort of complexity of what these different requirements are across the country is also part of those questions.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, sometimes they have to like literally live in the county, or
Mhm.
in your local municipality. All right. Well, thank you so much, Allison. This has been fantastic. Really appreciate your presentation and good luck with the program. I feel like we'll be talking again as you do more of this great work. Let me steal back the presentation and I'll put up our slides again. There we go. All right, so just a reminder about the great program at the University of Minnesota and our CEA program, where you can become an election expert that could get hired into the very positions that Alysoun was talking about. And frankly, sounds like there's an opening in Washington County in Minnesota. So there are two ways for you to sort of get involved in these programs. You could just take a class. You could also sign up for the full certificate program. There's a deadline for that here in the next couple of weeks. Learn more at CEA program at umn.edu. You can also go to the CEA website. I always put in CEA HHH in the search engine and it comes right up. It's the first thing that comes up. So definitely want to encourage you to do that. Um, just a heads up about the classes we're teaching this coming spring. So I'll be teaching my elections and the law class. Besides the instructor, it's a great class. So if you're interested in election, the sort of legal questions around elections, I think that's a great class to sign up for. Tim Collins at the University of Minnesota is teaching our Strategic Management Elections Administration course. And then Tammy Patrick from Election Center Claim, and then also her years in Maricopa County, Arizona, where all the fun is teaching data analysis for elections administration. And like I say, Ryan Macias is teaching election security midway through the semester. He's going to teach that half semester course starting in March. And Ryan is a rock star, but don't tell him I said that. All right. It's great to see all of you. Thanks again. We'll get another one of these webinars on the schedule and we'll see you soon. Have a great week.